Okay, thank you everybody. I hope you managed to grab a coffee and meet some new connections downstairs. You would have seen from the session that we just had that there's a good deal of interrelationships between an organisation's culture, its levels of inclusion, providing welcoming spaces, safe spaces for those that operate within an organisation. And these are themes that will be revisited throughout today. And we're going to explore some of those themes now, but in the context of diversity and equity, and specifically in the context of neurodiversity and neuroinclusion. I think it's possible in the diversity debate that maybe some of the non-visible or perhaps less visible facets of diverse organisations and the diverse population don't always get the attention that they deserve. So we're quite keen to widen that debate. And in that regard, I couldn't be happier for this session to be joined by Caragh McMurtry, former Team GB Olympic rower and the founder and director of Neurodiverse Sport, a community interest company which is set up to provide support for neurodivergent athletes and also to provide advocacy and education around neurodiversity and neuroinclusion in sport. And Cara's going to share some of her own experiences from a sporting perspective and also some of the work that she's doing across the sector in her new role. But in terms of framing the next session, just want to sort of highlight a few facts that maybe some of us are aware of, maybe some of us aren't. Because we talk about diversity and we understand that diverse groups produce better results, diverse boards produce better decisions. But that only really takes place when everybody feels included, feels welcome, feels that they can bring their authentic self, their whole self, to their role, to their organisation. And as I put in the session description, up to 20% of the population have a neurodivergent condition. So straight off, with no other consideration, that's a fifth of the population who perhaps are, or maybe even more pertinently, could be part of your organisation. They could be working in your organisation. They could be taking part in your sport if the environment was conducive, perhaps, to them overcoming that initial hesitancy and bringing themselves to the organisation. So straight away you've got a numbers issue. But I think also there's, I don't know if cynical is the right word, but in terms of what your organisation gets out of making the adaptations that we're going to talk around today. So the University of Michigan, for example, found that students with ADHD scored more highly than their peers on 11 different tests of creativity. JP Morgan, thinking about what sort of organisation JP Morgan is, perhaps not likely to surrender competitive advantage for no apparent reason. They run a program called Autism at Work, and they found that staff on that program are between the range of 90 to 140% more efficient than their peers, the sort of neurotypical employees. And it's quite interesting that what the head of that program said, and he said, this isn't a charity, this is a talent play. We're looking to attract talent to our organisation. We're not just being sort of, nice and warm and touchy-feely. There's actually a hard-edged reason why we're doing this. So there are clearly some advantages, but perhaps it's worth thinking on the other hand that around 2/3 of neurodivergent workers don't feel comfortable disclosing their neurodivergence at work because they fear, they'll be disadvantaged, they won't be accepted in their organisation. And whilst there are campaigns out to raise the profile of neurodiversity, such as Neurodiversity Celebration Month, which is in March, by the way, so we should all keep a lookout for that next year. This is starting to help open up the debate and help people to explore ways in which their organisations can be more inclusive and build the safety that we want to provide for people to be themselves, as I say, authentically in those organisations. And of course, there are organisations like Neurodiverse Sport, and we're going to talk about some of the work that they're doing to help across the sector. So I know a little bit about Carah's background. It's a fascinating background, both from a sporting point of view and also, I suppose, the obstacles in the way that we're going to talk about today. So I'm delighted that she's agreed to come and share some of those with you. I think you're going to get an awful lot out of today. So Caragh, thank you. Welcome.
Thank you.
And perhaps we can just set the scene a little bit by you talking about perhaps your sporting background to begin with, and some of the issues that you may have encountered along the way, and how you sort of found a way to cope with them.
Yeah, absolutely. Firstly, I want to say thank you for the introduction and for reading all that out. For context, I was going to do like a keynote speech, but that makes me really, really uncomfortable. So I pulled Craig onto the stage with me, and we came up with a bit of an agenda. And you said you don't like speaking on stage, but we kind of met in the middle. So I feel like even immediately that's quite a good example of neuroinclusion. So yeah, a bit about my sporting story. So I come from a really normal background. So when I was very young, I kind of grew up on a council estate. My parents then went to university, their teachers. I started rowing through an outreach program which was aimed at getting more state school children into the sport. It was called Project Awesome, OAR, very good. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I really loved the sport. I think as a child I was always very hyperactive, always playing outside, always playing up the park, running around, going to every sports club that I could, and every after-school club really. But rowing really took me, and I think partly because of, you would probably never have known that I was different if you looked at me at school. Maybe at primary school, because primary school I was a bit of a late or slow learner, and I went to, at St Mary's football stadium, something called Saint Study Support, where they tempted you to learn your times tables of polos. And it obviously worked, because by the time I got to secondary school, I was there. But I think that's quite common. Everyone learns differently, and for neurodivergent learners, often they learn at a different pace. Yeah, you would never have known. But internally, I always did feel different, and some things were quite a struggle. And sport for me, rowing for me, being on the water, was quite therapeutic. It's quite rhythmical, but also it was a way to kind of push away from the bank, away from my troubles, away from the kind of noise and the sensory stimulation that was kind of over-stimulating sometimes. And perhaps that kind of led to my love for it, and then because I loved it and it became my obsession and my special interest, I got really, really good at it really early. And I ended up going to the Junior World Championships and getting a silver medal, and I was the only kid from a state school background at that World Championships in the Great Britain team, and then medalled at the Under-23 World Championships, and then I was invited onto the national team, and then it went downhill from there. Joking, not joking. But yeah, I can talk a bit more about that, or is that going to come up later?
I mean, it can come up whenever you want.
Okay,
yep.
So...
let's get into the downhill.
Okay, let's get into the downhill. So I guess for the first 2 years I was kind of still performing, because I was still kind of a bit of a golden girl, I guess, getting the good books. So all of my differences were kind of seen as acceptable because I was still performing. As soon as something tripped me up, so it might have been illness, injury, actually for me it was something really unfair happened, and it was a crew thing. It wasn't aimed at me necessarily. I think a couple of members of the crew before the World Championships basically berated everyone, said the crew wasn't trying hard enough, etc., etc. And I'm very justice driven, so I was like, that is unacceptable. Went totally emotionally dysregulated, like literally flipped my lid. I was stroking the boat. The next day was the final, and we bombed. And then I think in my end of season review, I wrote like a tirade to the coaches, and I was like, this is unacceptable. Like, athletes shouldn't be kind of, you know, speaking in this way to each other. Like, this hierarchy isn't okay. But what I didn't realize was that was the system, and you shouldn't question the system. So suddenly I was no longer in the good books, and I was seen as someone who was a bit of a troublemaker because I spoke up against the system. And then that totally threw me, because I was like, mate, sport's meant to be fair. Like, you're meant to work hard and get what you deserve, and suddenly I wasn't. And then, yeah, then the kind of downward spiral kind of went on from there, and I actually ended up, I think, sort of cycles of regrouping from a bit of like the spiral kind of regroup. Now I really need to make this happen. How do I problem solve my way out of this kind of stress or depression or this not so good result? That kind of pattern actually ended up in me being misdiagnosed with bipolar disorder, which is surprisingly common for autistic women. So often you get diagnosed as bipolar or borderline personality disorder, two fun ones. And I was mismedicated for that. So over a 5-year period, I ended up taking 1,400 milligrams of lithium. So that's the kind of stuff that you see people in psychiatric wards put on. Don't get me started on that, but like 150 milligrams of lamotrigine and 25 milligrams of quetiapine. So that's 2 mood stabilizers and an antipsychotic. In retrospect, because I was autistic, because I spoke up, because I asked questions, because that's how I learned, but that looked like I was undermining people, because I was very justice driven, because I didn't have a massive social drive, because I was honest and I was blunt. At one point I was told, if you were on the men's team, your bluntness and your honesty might come across as passion, but you're on the women's team, so you need to learn to sugarcoat it. And then 5 years down the line, a performance director came in, and so I had my ear loops in and my headphones on earlier so that I didn't get distracted by the first talk, but I did hear something that relates to what I'm about to say. A performance director came in and he was really person-centered, and it was in response to one of the head coaches being ousted for bullying. That was pretty bad. I was on the receiving end of some of that, but none of my doing. And he was really there to make cultural change, because British rowing needed cultural change. And he was responsible for people actually looking at me as a human being. And he kind of forwarded me on to the UK Sport Mental Health Panel. They re-diagnosed me with autism, titrated off all the medication over 8 to 10 months, and we came up with a communication plan. It was labelled a management plan, but I don't like to call it that because I don't need managing. People needed to learn to communicate with me. It was don't ask me open-ended questions about my feelings, check I got the right message from a briefing, and make sure there's bland food available. So 2 for the coach, 1 for the nutritionist. Really difficult to manage, I am. So that was my management plan. Between the period in which I was at my lowest and then my highest a year and a half later, I got 17 seconds faster. So I hadn't PB'd since I got onto the team, and suddenly I was PBing and performing almost the best in the squad. Now, this performance director was given a year, 2 years, in amongst COVID to make change, and it didn't happen in time. So the Tokyo Olympics didn't go very well, and there was lots in the lead up to that that made it difficult. So for instance, COVID. But he was judged for that. And I've talked to other people afterwards, and they say, no, it takes at least 4 to 6 years to make cultural change. But because they didn't get the results, it was like, right, he's cut, he's out. And that's gone. And now it's swung all the way back to the really cutthroat kind of one-size-fits-all, anyone different can leave the building. And I just thought it was really interesting that someone said before, this change takes time, and you have to be brave and you have to invest, and not kind of pull the rug out from under people when they're trying to make change. But yeah, it kind of swung back. I still faced stigma and discrimination. I saw the light, and then it was taken away. And then, yeah, that's why I kind of retired and then set up Neurodiverse Sport, because I'm not an anomaly. I'm one of very, very, very many. And, you know, you talk about the amazing statistics, and there are a lot of people that fit into that really high-performing category. A lot of people are just normal people, though, and they still deserve to be supported. Like, we've decided that we should do things in a certain way, and that excludes a lot of people. Why can't we be flexible so that they can be included? But, yeah, that's what I'm saying.
I mean, the 2 things that, just thinking about your story, that stand out for me is, one is the benefits of having in place, you know, a system where the communication is correct, is tailored to you know, what can get the best out of you.
Yeah.
The other side is the idea of you having, you told me that you became very good at masking, that you were, you know, and it goes back to that idea of the not being able to bring your authentic self to, you know, to your training. But I was thinking, you're there on a elite athlete performance environment, so physically very demanding. Coupled with that, you're also presumably in quite an emotionally draining. Would that be the right sort of word?
Absolutely.
So you're almost getting the double whammy.
Yeah.
Of, you know, how did that impact on you?
And I'll add to that a triple whammy.
Okay.
Because then, as soon as you start underperforming, suddenly the bar is actually raised for you. So I remember starting to struggle, and then the coach is kind of saying, well, actually, not only do I want you to kind of reach that standard, I want you to go above and beyond. So it's a bizarre, like, vicious cycle. You just asked me a question, I completely forgot it because I was thinking about my answer that I wanted to say. What was the question?
Well, I mean, you sort of superseded the question because mine was only a double whammy.
Okay.
So you up the ante a little bit in terms of, you know, the impact that it has and your energy, your ability to be yourself, because the pressures are coming from, well, not two but three different directions.
Yeah, it's like, it's impossible, and I definitely felt like I was almost like a walking a set of rules. Like, I had to do all the work, I had to interpret what people were saying, I had to then translate what I was going to say. There was no meeting in the middle, and that really, really took away from my performance. And like I said, the difference was 17 seconds, and then in terms of my well-being, it was huge. And, you know, the fact that I was on all those mood stabilizers and antipsychotics speaks for itself. I mean, they didn't work, but there was a reason why I was put on them as well, because the sport that I absolutely loved, that I thrived in, I remember I loved competition. I used to, funnily enough, this is a very, like, teenage thing to do, but I remember my coach used to be like, think of someone you hate and push into the foot plate. I loved that. And then, so I used to do that, and then...
Should I move to a safe distance?
Stop. I'm older and wiser now, but, like, I remember being on the squad and just feeling like almost in fear all the time and scared of going on the water. The water was my safe space, and that was because I couldn't be myself. I was worried about every interaction because, you know, I'd want to speak and then I'd be like, no, wait, you can't be blunt, you can't be too honest, you can't. And I was thinking about what that other person was thinking, and I wasn't thinking about my performance, and it is exhausting. But it's not just neurodiversity. I definitely came from a very rigid kind of sporting structure, but I noticed it in terms of other kinds of diversity. If somebody was religious or gay or, you know, they came from a different culture or socio-economic background, it was very much assimilate or stay away. So you had to, it felt like if it was an image, you would have to, like, leave yourself at the door and then go into the building. And so if you fit that mold, it's okay, you can bring your whole self, but if you don't, you have to leave those parts of yourself that give you life and make you passionate and allow you to thrive. You have to leave them to the side. So of course you're not going to be able to be productive, effective, efficient. And you talk about the JP Morgan study. Well, what's important to say is they didn't just employ the autistic people, they gave them the reasonable adjustments that they needed. So a reasonable adjustment might not be even giving someone something, it might just be accepting that somebody doesn't want to make eye contact. That is so simple. And that's just adjusting your expectations and saying, okay, if so-and-so doesn't make eye contact, that's fine. That actually probably means they're in a good place. And then for someone else, okay, it means something different. They might be being rude to me. But it's just, it's making sure that, I guess, everyone feels like they can be themselves. And how to do that is, it's not just one-sided, it's not just one-sided change. Like, other people have to, the people in the management positions are probably the people with the most power to make it acceptable, and then everyone else will follow.
It's one of the things I was thinking about, you know, just as sort of running through this session over the weekend, was a lot of today is around psychological safety in general, about accepting spaces. And some of what you're talking about is just making our organisations more open, more inclusive, more welcoming, just across the board. So whatever, you know, the particular person you're looking to assimilate into an organisation, that it's just the type of environment that they can feel themselves in. You've mentioned a couple that might be specific to neurodivergent people. Are there examples of which are just general better cultures to move into and which are specific to neurodivergent people?
Yeah, probably like every person is different. So I think the photographer probably hates me because I came into the room and I was like, the lights, the flashing lights as well. So sorry if you get really bad photos wherever you are. But and I said to you, like, you don't need to apologise. The photographer doesn't need to apologise. But it is partly up to me to say, okay, this is my adjustment. And then you to say, okay, that's cool, I can accommodate that. That's as simple as it. It's just having that option. So everyone's different. So it's just making sure that people can ask for something and the reaction isn't, you're difficult or that's preferential treatment. The amount of times that I got told that's preferential treatment was unreal. Whereas actually, it's just what I need to get going. It's just what I need to put my best self out there. It's not, you're not giving me a boost. You're just, you know, I sit over here, someone sits here. It's just allowing me to go over there and do my thing. But there are some things that you can universally design, I would say, to cover more bases. So, for example, you've got a policy document that's really long and, you know, the writing's tiny, it's all close together. Is it something where someone could design it where they're speaking it on a video and there are subtitles and there's text next to it if someone's got text-to-speech software? Is there a way you can pull out key points and put them in infographics? Things like that. Then you're helping people who might have dyslexia, ADHD, autism, someone who's got something else going on in their life and just doesn't have time to read the whole document. So I think, yeah, there's certain things that will require that person to say, this is how you can accommodate me, because, you know, what accommodates one might not accommodate another, and you have to balance that up in any given situation. But then there are also some things that you can just do a better job of, you know, accommodating for everyone at once, I think.
And I think that conversation piece is the important thing, because, you know, when we first started talking, I think I said, no, I hope I don't say the wrong thing.
Yeah.
You know, and there's a nervousness on my part that though I knew perhaps my intentions were good, that I'd just cock it up by, you know, using the wrong terminology or something. And you were, you know, very helpful in that you say, you know, I can see your intentions are good. And I think if you come to the understanding where offence won't be taken where none's intended, I won't get too hung up on saying the wrong thing. And I think just in an email this week, I think you very gently corrected something that I'd written somewhere. I think it was just in the thing, but very sort of politely and very gently. So there was clearly nothing on your side. I didn't feel too bad. I'd learned something, which feels like a net win overall.
I think I remember that, but you got it off my website, and my
did.
website was out of date. So that was my issue that you copied, that then I corrected. It might have been something like with autism rather than autistic. So the autistic community kind of like to kind of try and be proud of being autistic. So they'll generally say, I am autistic rather than I'm a person with autism. Right. But I had said Caragh McMurtry with autism before.
So there's a cut and paste lesson for us all to learn.
Yeah,
there.
but that's collaboration, isn't it? Like, that's fine. Like, I feel like we worked really well together, so.
I mean, we're getting on quite quickly into this session, but are you able to tell us a little bit about the work that Neurodiverse Sport does? And you know, we can obviously direct everybody to go and check out the website.
Still needs updating.
Which will be updated in short order, I'd imagine. A little bit around the sort of guidance and support that you provide for athletes and organisations too.
Yeah, so firstly, about a year ago when I retired from rowing and I realised, okay, I'm going to do something about this, I'm a really impatient person, so I was not prepared to wait for any of the larger organisations to do something. And often they're getting pulled from all different directions, so they don't have the luxury of probably doing things most effectively or efficiently. So I was like, right, I'm going to hit this. And one of the key things that I wanted to make sure I did, and also it helped me to not feel like such a pressure to try and represent everyone, was I was like, right, what I can do is start telling stories, because basically like the bigger organisations, UK Sport England, at the time, this has changed since I started advocating, they didn't collect data on neurodiversity, and they wouldn't, because they didn't believe it existed in sport, in elite sport as well. So I was like, fine, I'll prove it does by starting to collect stories and interviews. And so I think there's over 30 interviews now with different athletes from recreational level to Olympic level who are neurodivergent. And I just think that's the best way to teach people about diversity. It's not my perspective, it's their stories and their life, and then you can take what you need from that. And there'll be like 10 lessons that you could draw from each person. And you can take 2 of those, or it's whatever applies to you at that time. So that's my favourite bit of the website, is the blog. And then in terms of like the main campaigns that I've got a lot of pots on the boil, but I kind of love it and hate it at the same time, but mainly love it. We started like a focus group, which is now morphing into a big conglomerate of organisations that are going to do some considerable things to make sport more neurodiverse. So watch the space. And then we also, so Neurodiverse Sport have a contract with the UK Sports Institute to provide neurodiversity education for Olympic teams. So we've done 3 sessions so far with various Olympic teams, and we're looking to sort of like move into the football space as well. So basically just educating on this is neurodiversity first. I'm just going to see how that goes. And then the third thing is we're designing a kind of sports communication passport, inspired by, I guess, my management plan, but it would be something that everyone could use, whether you are neurodivergent or not, and it's all about encouraging people to understand their own preferences and encouraging people to work collaboratively to trial different support strategies. And it's ensuring that everyone is using it, so that people who maybe are slightly different are part of a united initiative, because I think that's really important. You don't want to be the special needs person with special needs who is awkward and requires more effort on everyone's part. Like neurodivergent people, there's this kind of myth that autistic people are antisocial, and they're not. They have social needs as well. Everybody, or nearly everyone, wants to feel part of a community. So that non-othering, getting everyone involved is really important. That's what I see Neurodiverse Sport as, a very much a by the community, for the community, really inclusive, really honest, really authentic. I'm determined to never move away from that, no matter how big it gets. We'll see. You can, 2 years' time, come back to me and be like...
I think we're going to move to some questions, and while people start raising hands and getting mics to them, Caragh, I know that we sort of gave people a nice, easy path in with some positive statistics.
Oh, yeah.
And we left the door open for some less than positive statistics.
Yeah, I did ask to include these statistics. Yeah. Just, I'm really sorry to bring a downer on the day, but we'll bring back.
I mean, no, I think it's really important. They're stark.
They're very stark.
We need to hear them.
So, well, firstly, 80% of autistic people are unemployed. Yeah. Yet, you talked about the benefits of having autistic people in your workforce. The average life expectancy for autistic people is 20 years less than the average population, and that's not including autistic people with comorbid conditions. So actually, autistic people with comorbid conditions, it's 39 is the average life expectancy. Autistic people without intellectual impairment is, I think, 53. The second leading cause of death is suicide. 9 out of 10 autistic women have reported being victims of sexual violence. So there's a real common theme here, I think, and I think actually probably the starkest part is that most people in this room probably wouldn't have known that, and it's gone under the radar for so long. And we all have power to change that. We have power to change that just by not judging people, by not kind of thinking like, they're different to me, they're a problem, they're antisocial, it's easier to not include them. Just ask, I think, reach out, ask questions, forgive people for their differences and afford people the support that they need so that they can really excel where they do have strengths.
Yeah. No, I think that argument, coupled with the ones at the start, is pretty much a completely compelling case where we need to pay closer attention to this issue. Do we have any questions? I have to apologise to the people at home at the moment. I'm not getting the questions coming through to me here, so we'll try and solve that during the next session. But if people in the room currently do have questions, again, we're running 5-10 minutes over, but I think that's completely fine. So if you do have any questions, I can see a hand up at the front. Sorry, it's Denise, is it? Yeah.
Hello, oh, sorry.
Wrecking the room.
I'm Denise Blackwell from UK Dev Sport. Can you give me some idea of how you encourage autistic children to get involved in sport? I have autistic grandchildren and autistic children, and it's always been really hard to get them involved in sport because of all those barriers that are in, you know, sort of the overwhelm, how easily overwhelmed they are, and how people don't take their needs into account and just call them troublesome and, you know, oh, he doesn't listen. Well, no, of course he doesn't listen because you don't treat him in a certain way. So is there anything that I can do to encourage them to be more involved in sport and activity?
Yeah, I think it is difficult because the sporting environment needs to be inclusive for that to happen. And that is something I mentioned, the group that is forming from the focus group that we created. That is something that we're working to change, is the sporting environments, and then through the education that we're doing, trying to change sporting environments. In terms of what you can practically do, I would say just keep looking for the right environment and the right sport. Yeah, like try swimming, try football, just try all different things and different sports clubs. Because I don't want to generalise here, but I do find that a lot of autistic children that come through neurodiverse sport tend to sort of like swimming. I'm still working that out, but something to do with the sensory side of things. And I'm thinking sports where you learn quite piecemeally, like judo and things like that, could work. So like martial arts, but you know, I think it is all about just trying and not settling and hoping that in 2-5 years' time there will be more sports clubs that can ensure that they are educated and inclusive, and perhaps, you know, there'll be a system online in which you can find them. But for now, yeah, just keep trying.
Any other questions? We've answered them all. Yep, got a question there. Michael, thanks.
Hi, Caragh. Firstly, thank you for your honesty today. It's been hopefully very educational for everybody, certainly for me. Gary from Coach Core Foundation, we use apprenticeships to help underrepresented, disadvantaged young people back into employment and education. Andy up here was just asking what we do around this. So we've done sort of light touch training for some of our apprentices, but we're just about to launch a group that is comprised of autistic apprentices and giving them some specialist support. Question more though is around how can we prepare employers better to, you know, adapt the working space for those learners coming in. So I just wondered if you've got any top tips on that, because hopefully it might help others in the room too.
I guess it's all about awareness and education. So I think ensuring that you are aware and educated so that then you can inform the employers. What I would say is that reasonable adjustments are a legal requirement, but you kind of don't want to get to the point where you're forcing it. But yeah, it's things around just it's flexibility, flexible environments, perhaps asking questions, working with that young person, because they might not know what they need. So it's asking, going on the journey with them to help them discover what they need. But I think the first thing is attitudes and awareness, and possibly signposting as well. So if you have maybe a group of organisations and websites that you can signpost people to, that would probably be really helpful. But yeah, that would be, I wouldn't, again, probably with all the questions, I wouldn't be able to say specifically this is what you do, because neurodiversity, every single person is neurodiverse, and neurodivergence is divergence. It means every single person is different, so, but it's probably more about attitudes and signposting and awareness and things like that. I do remember you, so fun fact, I'm a facial recognizer, so that's my little autistic tweak, so I'll remember most of these faces. I won't remember names though, but.
Okay, I think we've got, just if this is the final question for this session, penultimate question for this session.
Thank you. Andy from Active Partnerships. It was a conversation this morning as well around culture, and obviously everything, so much has moved online now. So many remote workers, our team is fully remote across the whole country. Has that become an opportunity or a challenge around this area with employers now being so remote, it's so much online? And I suppose how different is it now for training and support for leaders and others to make sure we are completely inclusive and accessible?
I think an opportunity. I think, again, flexible, talking about flexibility, but flexible working, I think, has been a bit of a blessing for a lot of neurodivergent people, because I think there's this kind of myth. Some people will take advantage of the system and take advantage of home working to be lazy, I'm sure, but most people I don't think would. They'll probably take advantage of it to create the environment that they need around them. Maybe it's quiet, maybe it's no distractions, maybe it is that they need the TV on so that they can focus. So actually perhaps it is an opportunity for managers to ask the questions now that their employees have had a chance to test out working in the office, test out working at home. But again, you're only going to get honest answers if people feel psychologically safe to give them. So, yeah, I guess if you're ensuring people that you believe that there is not a one-size-fits-all solution, then they're more likely to trust that, okay, right, you're going to use my answers effectively. Whereas if they believe that you are very kind of set in your ways, they're never going to tell you the truth.
Okay, Jason, I think he's got a question.
Thanks, Craig. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Perfect.
It's Jason Wiltshire from England Hockey. It was just a point of note, really. We're talking about inclusion, but my department deals with safeguarding and discipline, and we've noticed the term neurodiversity has repeatedly sort of cropped up this year. We have dealt in the past with autistic offenders, etc., and we've had to sort of make reasonable adjustments even in that process. So I'm conscious, as I say, we're talking about inclusion, but we've really had to come away and look at our rules and look about whether our rules, our disciplinary rules, our safeguarding rules can be applied, in terms of the letter of the law, can we apply them to deal with this? And I think we're finding increasingly that we can't, and we're having to either come up with different sanctions, or bring experts in, or really change the tone or the language or the means in which we communicate in terms of dealing with them. And it just seems so straightforward dealing with discipline. Somebody's committed an offence, we issue a sanction, and suddenly this world's become quite complicated for us from a governance point of view. I just wondered if other sports have noticed the increase of people with these conditions, possibly.
Yeah, I think we've strayed slightly over time, but we did not necessarily with that in mind, but we did have a slightly longer lunch hour, which will now be a lunch hour. So I'm going to hand over now to my colleague, Emily, who's going to deliver the next session. But I think I speak for all of us when saying, Caragh, thank you so much for sharing. Really appreciate